Welcome to the Digital Culture Podcast, a podcast for people working in the creative and cultural sector and want to know more about digital. I'm your host, James Akers. This episode includes discussion of domestic abuse and violence, so we want to give listeners a heads up in case these topics are sensitive for you. Hello, and thanks for joining us for this episode of the Digital Culture Podcast. We're continuing to interview winners of the Digital Culture Awards over the next few episodes. I'm James, one of the tech champions of the Digital Culture Network. I'm a middle-aged white man with brown hair, wearing a green jumper. Today I'm interviewing the winner of the Digital Inclusion category, chosen by Tom Riles, a cultural consultant, strategist and writer. To talk about the winning project, my guests today are Louisa and Tam from Extant.
Hi, I'm Louisa Sanfey. I'm the Artist Development Manager at Extant, and I was the creative producer for the Unseen project. I'm a white woman in my early 40s. I've got long dark hair that's currently tied up in a ponytail. I wear glasses, and today I'm wearing a black t-shirt.
Hello, lovely to be here. I'm Tam Gilbert. I'm the trainee artistic director at Extant. And at the time of the Unseen, I was on the devising team. I also was the assistant producer, and I performed in one of the events as well. I'm a white woman in my 40s with blonde hair down to my shoulders, and I'm wearing a blue top.
It's great to have you on the episode today. Could you tell us about Unseen and what you wanted to achieve with it all?
An organisation called the Vision Foundation, who have since merged with another organisation called Fight for Sight, they had created a report called the Unseen Report, and they had a pot of funding available to projects that were working around the visually impaired community and domestic violence. And there was two strands of funding. So there was service provision in the field of visual impairment and domestic violence. And then there was another strand of this funding that was for awareness raising. And Extant has a history of dramatising fact-based reports. So it felt like a really natural fit for us to go for that funding and to make a project that around the Unseen Report that explored the very specific and unique ways in which domestic violence can affect the visually impaired community. So we worked very closely in the end with Fight for Sight and with the organisation Safe Lives that carried out the research and wrote the Unseen Report. So yeah, it started out as a pure funding bid and it became something very creative and collaborative with the funder. For this, we decided we wanted to make an audio drama after weighing up the options. And I worked with the associate artist Ian Rattray, the sound designer. I also worked with Extant's previous trainee artistic director, Ben Wilson, and he became the creative lead for the devising process that ultimately created an audio drama. It's about 45-minute long, fairly traditional audio drama, and Tam can speak more about the devising process.
I was part of the devising team. It was a team of 6 with our lead, Ben Wilson. I'm visually impaired, and it felt really important to highlight some of the stories which visually impaired people face. And I was particularly struck by some of the stats which came out of the Unseen Report. We spent a lot of time reading. It was published in October 2022. And at the time, I think there were a few things that really struck me. 1 in 3 disabled people are likely to have experienced some kind of abuse in their lifetime. And that could be from more than one person. And another big one was 1 in 12 visually impaired people at the time of 2022 were estimated to have been a victim or survivor of domestic abuse, and that translates to 88,000 visually impaired victims and survivors, which was something I just felt overwhelming. And then I guess just not to bore everybody with the stats, but we were talking about the process a lot and the fact that some of this could take place in the home by people they trust as well, but also the fact that abuse professionals are not necessarily trained in this area. So less than 1 in 5 professionals, according to the report, said that they didn't necessarily have experience of supporting a visually impaired person who had experienced abuse, and that really hit home.
In terms of putting the project together as well, we'd been working with a visually impaired sound designer called Ian Rattray, and we were looking for a way to work more closely with him. Extant has been running for a number of years an associate artist program, and normally that associate artist has been a writer, a director, a theatre maker who has followed a more traditional path. We work with them, we put on a show. I've produced several shows on behalf of Extant for associate artists. But with Ian, as a sound designer, that is not usually their role in the project. So we felt that working across both Unseen and another associate artist project with Ian as an associate artist and getting additional mentorship and support around his creative practice. The project was informed by the fact that the associate artist on the project was a sound designer. And that's where a lot of decisions were made in terms of the focus was always going to be on creating some kind of sound piece. And we did toy with having that be live, but in the end moved to a radio drama format, partly because of working with him, partly because of the greater potential with that kind of mission from the funder in mind of awareness raising. The digital platform seemed to have a higher reach. But it was interesting in that way. It wasn't led by the sound designer, but it was definitely shaped and informed by that. And then through the mentoring and support that he received, we hooked him up with connections with established sighted sound designers who are out there working in the field. And that's what led to collaborations. We realised quite early on that QLab, one of the major platforms for sound designers to work on, nobody had ever thought about making it screen reader accessible before. And through those mentoring connections, Ian was able to reach out to the software designers at QLab, and they were really open to working with him to making it screen reader accessible. So the project has had loads of slightly random knock-on effects as well. We started out with quite a straightforward mission to raise awareness of how domestic violence uniquely impacts visually impaired people. And we've ended up doing a lot of other things as well.
I think that's what really impressed the judges when they were reviewing your entry, is that, yes, you are raising this awareness, but as a side, you've got this additional outcome that QLab has this new functionality which enables more people to be able to use that platform.
Yeah, now it's about trying to get more screen reader users to become sound designers now that the software is ready for them.
What impact did that digital approach have on the experience for your creative team and the artists you're working with and eventually the audiences that are experiencing it?
Over our devising period, we met over 2 months and we worked very closely with the report, but also building fictional stories. For us, we really wanted to show the different types of coercive control and how this could happen and how it could very quickly shatter someone's confidence. Our team are all made up of visually impaired writers in the room, so it was really important to use digital software as part of our regular rehearsal process, and this was how we gathered and shared information amongst team members. So we used shared docs a lot on Dropbox for people to receive session notes at the end of each evening so that they could reflect what we'd achieved and bring ideas forward to the next rehearsal. And also we used WhatsApp as a way for the team to share any links to wider articles that they'd heard about or thoughts that they had. And we often used this WhatsApp group as a way of recording what we created in the space to test it and see what it would sound like digitally, because it was a sound piece and we just wanted to know how things would come across. And to that end, we worked with Ian Rattray, our sound designer, brought him into rehearsals. I remember one time we had a session with him where we just asked him to create a soundscape of some sounds that we wanted to use just so that we could hear and see how that would come across. It was really exciting to work digitally in that way.
I should maybe go back and explain the context for that. We started doing live events when the audio drama had been recorded and completed. We did what was supposed to be a one-off pilot launch where we had a 20-minute, picked 5 key scenes from the audio drama and performed them. And the idea was it was just a launch party, but the format was surprisingly powerful. For that, we had hoped to use more actors, but for cost reasons, we just took the main 2 actors who were the voices who had recorded the audio drama for those main characters. And we used Ian's expertise of working with a balance of live and recorded voices in previous shows. So we performed it that way for this kind of launch party as a one-off. But it was so popular, we were asked to perform it again at the Bloomsbury Festival in London the following October. They wanted to combine the live performance with the timed broadcast, so almost to have a listening party. So we did an afternoon event and then listened to the piece in the evening. And then from that, we built a very small tour of some other venues that we were partnered with, and we knew that there would be a live audience. And then for that mini tour, we brought in a panel discussion element. So we made the performed section slightly longer and more crafted. And we brought in partner organisations. So domestic abuse organisations that we'd worked with, Fight for Sight, many of their staff members who'd been really involved in the creation of the Unseen Report. Some of that funding had gone to service providers to make toolkits for refuges to use to make their refuges more accessible for visually impaired people. So we had the funder talking about how they worked with those partners. We had the partners come in and talked about how they rolled out the toolkit. And it became this really wonderful conversation across different venues. And I ended up writing it all out into a blog article for the Extant website, which again then sparked further conversation with Safe Lives, who were involved in creating the Unseen Report. We ran creative writing online workshops for visually impaired survivors. It was separate to the process for confidentiality reasons. The lessons learned and the conversations that came out of those workshops went back into the devising process. But then at the live events, we realised that that process had continued with our visually impaired facilitator, who was also our script editor. Everyone was multi-roles on this project. And so Lou Hall had gone on to work with Safe Lives, running more workshops with survivors to help influence training that they were then providing to IDVAs, independent domestic violence advocates, and to people who work with sight loss to work better with visually impaired people who may be experiencing abuse, who may want to make a disclosure. It became this really lovely cross-discipline domestic abuse sector, working with sight loss sector, working with us as a creative organisation. And then we ran the event again. We were asked to perform it in Portsmouth. Somebody had heard us being interviewed, I think, on In Touch. They went away and listened to the audio drama and they loved it so much they asked us to bring the live event to their Portsmouth Central Library. And then Tam stepped in as a performer because one of the performers hadn't been available for that performance. So it's all just this interplay between the real world of the online world and hearing about the show digitally and then asking us to come and perform it live. It's been a bit of an evolution. But yeah, Tam stepped in and was playing the role of Lucy in our most recent outing. And then it evolved even further, didn't it, Tam?
Yes, it did. I was part of the Unseen in Portsmouth earlier this year. And for me, having been part of the original process, I hadn't been to any of the previous performances. So one of the things that struck me was getting the timing right. Myself and the other performer were live on stage with live monologues, and then that needed to be timed with the recorded elements of the show. And that felt quite risky in many ways because you're working independently on your monologues and you really need to make sure that you're not too long or too short. Whereas I think when you're working with a partner, you can bounce off each other more and there's more flexibility. Whereas for this, it was very precise. But actually working on a stage but hearing the sound, that brought an extra element, this digital element, which felt new and very different to types of performances I've been involved with before. And I think it was really lovely to hear the audience share their feedback on the Unseen as well. And many felt comfortable to share their stories. And that was really profound and very generous.
Yeah, that's been quite a common occurrence at the live events. When we did the creative workshops, it's facilitated a space where visually impaired people have been able to make disclosures. And we've always tried to prioritise well-being for the team. We were aware that there may be people on the team who'd experienced some of those issues themselves. So we made sure to create a well-being pack and have counselling services available to all the freelance team and everybody who was involved in the project, including the actors, in case they found anything touched a bit too close to home or they needed additional support. We made sure that there was signposting information for the audience members. And then when we did the creative workshops with visually impaired survivors, an IDVA who works for Safe Lives was present in the room, and we were able to create breakout spaces for those occurrences where somebody needed an additional support in that moment. Because obviously working through creative writing, we're working on different creative toolkits that did bring emotions close to the surface. So we made sure there was a safe space and an appropriately trained person to step to the side, as it were, in a breakout room and just have that quiet moment with them. And we made sure that those sessions were anonymized for participants. They didn't have to give their real names. They didn't have to give any information. So it just became a very safe space for the number of participants who were able to attend those workshops. And we allowed them to feed into the devising process, but again, anonymously. So it's more like the themes that came up or the ways in which people spoke rather than using stories directly. We had met a person called Salia Rashid, who's a visually impaired survivor of honour-based abuse from her family. And she now works as an activist. She worked with Fight for Sight. She was involved in the selection process for which organisations received the funding. She was really delighted when I reached out to her and said, hey, would you like to help us with rehearsals? Because she had championed us to receive this funding and make the project. So it was really brilliant to have the opportunity for her to come into rehearsals. She was very excited to get involved in the creative process, and she very generously shared her personal experience with the devising room, and also was part of our live events, came on the panels. And I should mention that one of our live events was in fact a digital event. So I run a monthly networking group called Extant Connect for visually impaired creatives and theatre makers. And we made that an online, unseen Extant Connect. And Celine came and presented at the online event as well. It was really important for us, as Tam said, to involve the real voices of survivors. And we also wanted to make sure that the work was accurate. So we brought in an advert into rehearsals who's worked on the refuge helpline, and she talked us through their scripts. When somebody calls the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, there is a script that the advisors follow to help guide that conversation, to make sure that they gather all the relevant information and help that person in the best way possible. So the IDVA who had worked on the helpline talked us through that conversation and script. So a lot of what is in the audio drama has been fact-checked either by a survivor or by an IDVA to make sure that we're not misrepresenting and that it is as accurate as possible. We use a lot of data, as Tam mentioned earlier. We use statistics and quotes from the report directly. So we tried to make sure that it was both entertaining, and that's something that was said by the creative team on day one. We want this not to be like a doom and gloom, kitchen sink, miserable story about abuse and hopeless situations. From the very beginning, there was talk about making it funny. The room should feel enjoyable, and the audio drama should be surprisingly enjoyable to listen to. There's some excellent jokes in there that make me giggle every single time. But also they should be really accurate and be a source of information. So if somebody listens to the audio drama who's in an abusive situation, that they will hopefully be able to recognize some of that experience from what they're hearing from the drama. And there will be points of information in there that will help them. Potentially, we give out the helpline number in the drama. In the end credits, we've got a list of resources that people can call and access. And we always post a list of resources on our website alongside the audio drama where it's embedded, so that people have access to that information in a way that hopefully they will be able to use.
Yeah, some of those jokes are great. And it sounds like digital is interwoven through everything you're doing. Throughout this whole project, were there any key challenges that digital helped you overcome? Or did it cause problems?
I think Tam mentioned about note taking. I think when you're working with visually impaired people, the vast majority of the team was visually impaired, like all the creative roles. It was really just myself as creative producer, then access workers and the stage manager that we had. All our stage managers have been cited, but all the devising team, the sound designer, the director, actors, all of those roles, the script editor, all visually impaired people. So there are occasions where one person is able to access a particular format and somebody else isn't. So it's about trying to find systems that will going to work for everyone, which can be just a little more tricky. There were conversations about some people really love Google Drive or Dropbox, but other people don't get on with it so well. Their technology, their visual impairment doesn't jive with that as much. I think we settled on Dropbox was the most accessible in terms of file transfers, but there's been a kind of balancing act. And that's where the access workers step in sometimes as well, where they'll facilitate getting information to people in a way that works for them.
Has any of the work that you've done with Unseen changed the way that you approach digital? Or were you doing a lot of this stuff anyway?
Extant does really primarily work with visually impaired people. So there are conversations that we were already having around systems and working digitally. We've very recently, within the last month, recruited a visually impaired trainee creative producer. We're calling the TCP. And the number one challenge is that producing basically runs on spreadsheets, right? But spreadsheets are not accessible for blind people. Ava Brewster, our new TCP, prefers to receive information through a braille reader, which is a super cool digital piece of kit. But spreadsheets are like just a jumble of information. And it works brilliantly for me when I'm producing because you put your numbers in and then you can run formulas and stuff and it adds them all up for you. It just makes things really easy at a glance. If you can't glance, then that tool suddenly becomes completely useless and actually quite hostile. So that's a big challenge that I've not solved it yet. She's only been in the company for a month, but that's going to be a big challenge because spreadsheets are the backbone of producing. So how do you get a visually impaired producer to be equitable in that situation? How can she run that project in the way? How are we going to structure that to support her to have all that information that other people use so instinctively, but isn't accessible to her? It's not a creative challenge as such. It's more of a practical one that's puzzling me. If anybody has any ideas of something that basically does what a spreadsheet does but isn't a spreadsheet, let me know.
There you go. Hopefully our listeners have an answer for you. Throughout all this then, if you could give one tip to another cultural organisation looking to make their work more digitally inclusive, what would it be?
I would just advise people to have fun with it and experiment and test, and just don't be afraid to try things out, but also to talk through any challenges and come up with a solution as a team.
And I think involve the community that you're trying to reach. Don't assume something's going to be accessible because you think it is. Ask the community, does this work for you?
They're really good tips. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to speak to you both today, Louisa and Tam. For people that want to find out more about Extant and Unseen, where can they go?
www.extant.org.uk/unseen.
Thanks so much, Louisa and Tam. It's been brilliant speaking to you.
Lovely to speak to you too.
It's been brilliant. Thanks for your time.